Hey everyone, Jeff Dorman, Chief Investment Officer at ARCA, back again for our weekly edition of That's Our Two Satoshis Live. For those who are just joining for the first time, or maybe those who join all the time, we do this every week. We talk about the digital asset markets. Typically, we talk about current events as well as a topic or two here and there that we write about on our blog, which you can find on our website ar.ca/blog, appropriately named That's Our Two Satoshis. And we bring in a guest or two here and there when there's things going on. So today I am honored to have Henry Blynn, Associate PM at R01 Capital, a liquid crypto fund, who I actually just met for the first time this last week. So Henry, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Excited.
What's not excited right now is people who are long digital assets. You and I were fortunate enough to go to the Masters last week. That was a nice event. Shout out to Galaxy Digital for inviting us. One of the things that stood out to me was you had a little bit of a spidey sense on Friday morning. For those not familiar, when you're at the Masters, you have no phone, no connectivity. Henry actually left early and just had a hunch the markets were going down. And I resonate with that because there are certainly, over my 20 plus years doing this now, nights where I just don't sleep well. And I have no reason for not sleeping well other than just expecting the markets to be down the next morning. And usually my gut is right. So what were you feeling and what happened that day that made you kind of rush back to your computer?
Yeah, I think first off, personally, I'm always thinking about work. So, if I'm enjoying myself too much, I tend to want to get back to the screen. So I think it's part of that. I think secondly, Friday volatility is something that has happened. It's kind of a pattern in crypto, which there are those big Friday moves, there's option expiries. So I think that really heightened the spidey sense as well. I would love to say that you know I knew exactly what was coming. But working in a crypto fund, as you're always thinking about it 24/7. And I had a feeling that I just wanted to come back and check in on the computer. And ultimately, when you came back, about an hour later, I was staring at one of the biggest long liquidation days since the bull run started in the fall. Even the next day too was the second and third biggest. So I think it's really both personal and a little spidey sense of kind of being a worrier myself. But I wish I actually knew exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it. I mean, obviously, fortunately now ARC has been around for a while. I'm blessed with a large and very capable team who handles most of the day to day. Anyway, so I can enjoy a day off like we did last week. But more importantly, I was thinking more about after the fact and after the move. A lot of people were attributing it to the war, or at least the impending war, and certainly just the conflict in the Middle East with Israel and Iran. Um, I thought that was garbage. And not to say, just to be clear here, there's no question that the timing of the sell-off was triggered by the headline. But that's not the reason we're down. And what I mean by that is there's just no evidence throughout history that wars are bad for markets, whether that be equity markets or digital assets. We've just seen plenty of events over the years, from going back to equity markets, Vietnam War, Gulf War, Afghanistan War, Iraq War, you name it. Knee-jerk reaction lower by some algos and by some knee-jerk traders, and then ultimately it's up, right, for a variety of reasons, not least of which is that generally wars lead to a lot of government spending, which is good for GDP, which is ultimately good for inflationary assets. Um, but also, we've seen enough with just crypto specifically as well that most of the time Bitcoin does seem to have more of a flight to quality response. What was interesting about the last 3 days here was not only did Bitcoin go down upon these headlines multiple times, because there's been multiple headlines, but also the 10-year U.S. Treasury is now a good 25 basis points wider in yield as well. Your typical kind of safe haven instruments are not acting like safe havens right now. Maybe to some extent gold is, but even that's come off a little bit. Um, so what I was thinking about was, again, there's no question that the trigger was from the war. But I think this was more of a, I think I used the term, and you mentioned as well, like the straw that kind of broke the camel's back. Meaning there were other factors that were ultimately leaning on the market for the last few weeks, and ultimately it just needed sort of a trigger to crash through. And what I mean by that is Bitcoin ETF inflows have stalled, at least temporarily. The ETH ETF, most participants agree that timing is certainly not May, and maybe even past this year. You had the Wells notice issued by the SEC to Uniswap. You had obviously rates rising, the dollar rising, the VIX rising. Certainly expectations of, if not certainly not imminent rate cuts, right? Certainly the timing of that being pushed off. And then, of course, Solana, one of the leaders of the market this cycle thus far, having performance issues and bandwidth issues. Not to mention unsustainable meme coin trading, as well as maybe tax day here in the U.S. affecting it. But the point is, there was a lot of factors here, right? And the war was kind of just the headline that triggered some of the cascading liquidations. I just don't personally think that was really the reason we're lower. And all else equal, if it's just because of the war, it'll retrace pretty quickly. What do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we're on the same page with respect to it being the final straw. I think it does present an interesting opportunity for investors when it comes to altcoin selection. What we saw on that move Friday and especially Saturday was a lot of these altcoins erasing their year-to-date gains. I haven't seen names, DeFi altcoins dropping, 30% a day. Typically, when we see liquidation like that, typically that you'd see them, negative 15% for, 10 seconds, and then the market rebounds. We haven't had such a sustained destruction of altcoins this year, or really, since the bull run started. So I think it gives investors a really good opportunity to, sit back and think about the alts that they're choosing. I think it's only going to get harder for altcoins while the market resets here. And I think, unfortunately, as we mentioned, meme coins, one can argue that it's a lot easier to pitch an investor a meme coin because they understand it immediately versus, a hard to understand, altcoin project where a lot of people's attention lapses pretty quickly. So I think it presents a really good opportunity for the strong projects to shine here, excluding the majors, BTC, ETH, and I think that if you can pick the right ones off the bottom here, where open interest is flushed out, I think it can present a pretty good opportunity for a medium term bump here in the markets.
Yeah, it makes me laugh that everyone's just sort of the standard commentary now is that this is a bull cycle, right? That every 4 years,
Yeah.
bull cycle, the halving, et cetera. And it's just been sort of agreed upon, even though there's no real data to support that. Meaning, yes, the broader market is a lot higher over the last 6 months. But that's really been pretty concentrated in a handful, maybe 10 to 20, 30 names of those real gains, kind of very similar to the equity market and the Magnificent Seven. There has not been a lot of breadth to this market. And as you mentioned, even going into the last week, there was still about a third of the market was not up year to date. And then, of course, after this flushing, almost half the market is now down year to date. So it certainly doesn't feel like a bull market. What it feels like is a very selective buying of good projects. Obviously, the Bitcoin ETF has certainly juiced demand into that product, over 13 billion of inflows, which has then trickled down into other areas. But it's not trickling down uniformly. So, to me, that's a healthier market. I don't really love student body left, student body right markets where everything's up and everything's down together. There's just, beta markets are just, one, less interesting, and two, they're harder to believe in. Whereas when you get a market where some things are down for good reasons and some things are up for good reasons, it tends to give me a little more confidence that there's some real thought going into this and not just money being thrown anywhere. So there's always going to be outliers here and there for sure. But again, with more than half the market now down year to date, either this really is a bull cycle, in which case there's a lot of bottom feeding to do, like you just mentioned, or maybe we should be careful throwing around terms like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's always good to be, to buy when there's fear, and blood in the water. I think another thing that you touched on was, the BTC, flows. It was interesting when, the ETF launched, it became really a tradable event, that IBIT number that would come out at, almost midnight, and the market reacted heavily to that. And I think as the market has adjusted and kind of priced in that average daily flow number, the markets are looking for something else, a different narrative to pick up the market. Whereas we've seen these, the past 2 days, reported days have been negative outflows. I think the market's looking for, another catalyst. And, is it the halving this Friday night? Maybe. Typically, could be a sell the news event, although we've already sold off a lot, which could actually make a case for, that it will be more of a catalyst this time around. But I think the market's really yearning for a strong new narrative, while the ground is shaky.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be looking for those green shoots to see, just like I said, there's 7 or 8 factors that were kind of leaning
Yep.
negative and ultimately broke. Now we're going to look for those green shoots, those, couple of factors that are leaning the other way to see if we can come out of this market. So speaking of green shoots, you and I had a chance to go to the Masters, which for me was a pretty, maybe a once in a lifetime experience. Not sure I'll ever get the opportunity to go back. And like you mentioned, you're always kind of thinking about the market just 24/7. I found myself doing the exact same thing as I was walking around the grounds at Augusta, kind of just drawing parallels and analogies here and there to the digital asset market, which is actually funny because having no phone and no pen and no paper, I was like, man, as I was thinking of these things, I was like, how am I going to remember these and actually write about them? But I did manage on the plane on the way home. I did manage to come up with 18 ways that we can compare the digital asset market to our day at the Masters. For those who want to read all 18 of them, you can certainly go to the website, like I mentioned, ar.ca/blog, and read all of them. But a couple, you and I talked about a few times. There were certainly a couple things that I think stood out. So, do you want to any of the ones either that I wrote or you were thinking about that really kind of blended the two in terms of your?
Yeah, actually, I think one of them, which was a strong one, Jeff, was when we were sitting. I think it was on the green, the stands on the fourth green, and a gentleman in front of us got struck by a ball, and really started bleeding everywhere. And there was a talk of the tournament, almost, or the people around us for the next, couple hours. And you related that to crypto and how there can be either positive or negative things that people won't stop talking about. And what really resonated with me is when you're speaking to potential LPs and people that are thinking about crypto in general, whether it be your family at Thanksgiving or people that are not in the ecosystem, it's always FTX fallout, and everyone is very focused on that, and they won't stop talking about it. And yes, it has benefited medium long term investors like our funds, where we have benefited from the cheaper prices. However, it is something that we ultimately want to get rid of, and ultimately allow more capital to flow into the space. So I thought that was actually a metaphor that was pretty good. Which one was your favorite that you wrote?
Yeah, a couple of them. I mean, I think one was just literally everywhere I walked and stood on the course. You just hear people chattering like, "This guy's got to change his grip," or "Oh, his backswing didn't look right on the." It's like we were watching 89 of the best golfers in the world who were doing things that almost nobody could do. And yet here, these millions of people in the stands couldn't help themselves but to chatter about, oh, what could they, should they be doing? What could they be doing differently? Or what kind of approach shot he's going to take here? And it reminded me of Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon and Nouriel Rubini and all these guys who clearly have no expertise, but just can't stop talking about the digital asset market. And so I'm going to shout out to all the Masters patrons that I saw who, in my book, were just a bunch of non-expert talking heads who couldn't help themselves, given that they were having front row seats to what was happening around them. The other one too, as I thought was, I walked. I think you and I actually didn't meet up until Thursday night, but I got there Thursday morning and I walked the course. I followed a random group. No real thought process to it. I just wanted to follow a group that didn't have a lot of people following them. So this was Cam Smith and Wyndham Clark, and I followed them from hole 1 all the way through hole 18. And a couple of things that jumped out from that was, one, again, nobody cared about them until they started playing well. Around the 7th, 8th hole, they were all 2 under, and all of a sudden, you just saw this flock of people and the flock of media. Every one of them had their own cameraman by the 9th hole, and right on cue, as soon as the attention happened, the golfers started playing poorly, and the crowd dissipated. Right, so just the analogy there is. One, it's fun to be early, right? It's fun to be an early investor in something and be like, oh, I picked these guys. I followed them from hole 1. Like I've been with them the whole way. No different than when you find your favorite band or a comedian or someone where you're early and you feel like a vested interest. And really, that's what the digital asset market has always been to me. It's like there's a reason you have this cult-like following and these evangelists following these projects. It's because they get to get in early. I always thought tokens were the greatest capital formation and customer bootstrapping mechanism ever. And it turns all these early customers into investors and ultimately into power users and evangelists and just loyal customers for life. And that's kind of how you feel when you just pick something early and stand with them. And also, you get equally annoyed when the crowd starts to come in. You're like, get out of here! This was my thing. I don't want all these vultures here. In general, kind of following the wisdom of the crowds just doesn't work, right? You have to do your own work and be early to something. So I thought that was interesting, and also just just how exhausted I was walking the course. I mean, this
Yeah.
was, I've played a fair amount of golf in my life and walked to many courses. It is just an incredibly long course. It is so hilly and challenging and demanding. And you just really can't appreciate that when you watch it on TV, just how hard it is for these players to actually make amazing golf shots while also, go walking 6 miles on this incredibly hilly terrain. So it kind of reminded me of, I consider myself a crypto expert. I've been doing this professionally for 6 years and, personally longer than that. I understand a lot of these DeFi apps. I use them. I understand blockchain applications and farming and staking and all these different explorers. It's nothing. And you think about these people buying like an ETF and saying they're, in crypto. It's like it's very different having a passive investment in an ETF or just sort of like, owning an asset on Coinbase versus like being in the weeds and doing it yourself. And really kind of getting your hands dirty. So that was, I appreciate that as well. Just the complete stark difference between watching it on TV on my couch versus actually being there and experiencing it. Not to mention just how crazy windy it was.
Yeah, we got lucky with the weather as well. Thankfully, I think Saturday when we weren't there it was 85, so that would have made you a lot more tired. I think one of the other ones you had was this resilience of the crypto market. Bitcoin specifically. I don't think not a lot of funds would have thought in August last year that Bitcoin would have been the best performing assets, to this current date. I know a lot of funds went long altcoin baskets and they can't even keep up with the Bitcoin as a benchmark. I think that speaks to the golfers as well. You see a lot of guys that Jordan Spieth, I think hit it was 5 over on one hole, and he had to play a whole other round on Saturday. It takes a different type of mental toughness to just being crypto in itself, just like being a golfer.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I'll leave the audience on this last one too. Something that a couple of them that I thought were interesting was any of us, especially here in the United States, who have been in the digital asset market now for most of the decade, pretty frustrated with the regulators here in the U.S. and the lack of explicit rules. I thought it's funny too when I was walking the course how often you just sort of look in the bushes or under a bleachers and you just see this random old guy in a suit, and it was clear that they were the rules judges, but they only really came out when there was a problem. And it was just strange to me how often a problem happened and how the golfers really didn't know the rules. Like, where do I take a drop? How far can I move the ball? Is this an unplayable lie? My ball is touching the walkway. Can I move it? And it was just very funny watching this, again, the 89 best golfers in the world out there doing something that they do literally every day and play tournaments just about every weekend and still don't know the rules. So I think that was pretty apropos to what we're dealing with in digital assets land with the old guy is ready to help you, but not really, because why don't they just make the rules more transparent up front? And then finally, this was just a personal favorite of mine. For those who have ever, heard the stories of how cheap the food is at the Masters, I was dead set when I got there to eating everything I could off that menu. I mean, we're talking $1.50 egg salad sandwiches and pimento cheese sandwiches and barbecue sandwiches. And I had 5 different sandwiches throughout the 2 days there, and they were all terrible. I didn't have a single one that I thought was even remotely enjoyable. But I kept going back, right? Because they were cheap and it was fun and it was something that I'll never get a chance to do again. So I would equate that to, chasing low priced meme coins and buying way too many of them just because they're cheap and they're available and it's kind of fun to say you did. So again, kind of hard for guys like you and me to do anything in life anymore without equating it back to digital assets in some way. But ultimately, look, I know a lot of people think golf is a waste of time and maybe a waste of land. It's boring. It's definitely not for everyone. I think a lot of people think that about crypto as well. I disagree. I know you disagree. I respect others' opinions, but golf is awesome, and so is the digital asset market. So with that, any parting thoughts, Henry, for the people here? Anything that you think is the most interesting about the markets or about the Masters or anything that comes to mind?
No, I think we covered it. Thanks for having me, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Very good. Well, tell the listeners where they can find you. I know you're not a big Twitter guy yourself, but where can they find you? Where can they learn more about R01 Capital?
Yeah, search me on LinkedIn. Our website's going up, soon in the next couple of weeks. Henry Blynn, Blynn. We'll be providing more information on the fund itself and our strategy.
Great. Well, best of luck to you. And Henry, thanks for joining me. And hopefully next time we do this, we got better markets to deal with. So that's it for this week, guys. I appreciate everyone listening. That's our 2 Satoshis Live. We'll be back again next Tuesday. And of course, check out the blog and read the whole piece for yourself. Henry, thanks for joining. See you soon, pal.
Thanks, Jeff.